There was always a unique atmosphere in the orphanage, a mixture of children's laughter, crying, and countless invisible scars. That's where we met Rachel. She stood aside, clutching a worn-out teddy bear, looking at us with distrust. Her large brown eyes held a deep sorrow that pierced right to the bone. The caretaker warned us that the girl had been through a lot of tragedies and had a difficult past. Her life is a chain of horrifying accidents, she said in a quiet voice, as if afraid Rachel might hear. The first tragedy occurred when Rachel was only 5 years old. Her family home burned to the ground due to faulty wiring. The fire engulfed the house late at night, when everyone was already asleep. Police found Rachel in the yard, crying, covered in ash, and barely conscious. Her entire family perished in the fire. The only memory she had left of her past was a charred teddy bear she clung to tightly. She was placed in a foster family. At first, everything seemed fine, but soon another tragedy invaded the girl's life. One evening, neighbors heard screams coming from their house. When the police arrived, they found a horrifying scene. The foster parents had been brutally murdered. Rachel was discovered under a table, covered in blood, but unharmed. She was sobbing and muttering something incoherent. The killer was never found. As we reviewed her case, the caretaker explained, "She's withdrawn, but deep down, she just wants love and care. Maybe that will help her be a child again." My wife smiled confidently and replied, "We'll try. She deserves a chance." Rachel seemed happy when we brought her home. Her eyes lit up when she first saw her room, bright, decorated with colorful toys and dolls. For the first time in a long while, she smiled. A few days later, I noticed how intently she examined her toys. Her little hands sorted through plush animals, building blocks, and suddenly, I saw her pick up a sharp knife that had accidentally ended up in her collection. "Just stay out of trouble and you can play with anything you want, all right?" I said half-jokingly, watching her. She looked up and quietly asked, "Do you really mean I can play with this?" There was an odd gleam in her eyes. I laughed. "Of course, as long as you don't hurt anyone." She paused for a moment and then added, "Can I start with the boy next door? He always annoys me." "I love you, Daddy," she said, hugging me so tightly that I almost felt my ribs crack. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, lifting her in my arms. At that moment, I didn't know I was holding my little serial killer. The following days were quiet, almost too quiet. Rachel turned out to be a very obedient child. She played with her toys in her room, occasionally going outside to sit on the swing and stare at the horizon for hours. Her behavior was impeccable, maybe even too much so. My wife was pleased that the girl had adapted so quickly to her new home, but I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Her smile always seemed slightly fake, and her eyes, too watchful, as if she was always observing. One day, returning from work, I noticed the neighbor boy, Derry, standing by the fence. He looked frightened. "What's wrong, kid?" I asked. "That girl of yours, she's weird. She told me that if I keep teasing her cat, I'll wake up without fingers." I laughed, but it was more of a defensive reaction than genuine amusement. Derry looked like he truly believed what he was saying. At home, I decided to talk to Rachel. She was sitting on the floor in her room, building some strange tower out of blocks. When I asked her about Derry, she replied without even looking up, "He won't bother me anymore, Daddy. I took care of it." The short sentence hung in the air, loaded with a meaning I didn't yet understand. That night, I couldn't sleep. Everything I knew about Rachel's past now seemed far from coincidental. The next morning, I heard shouting outside. Looking out the window, I saw Derry's mother running down the street, calling for her son. The boy had gone missing. The police began searching, but it took several days to find him. He was discovered in an abandoned house nearby. He was alive but terrified. He kept repeating the same phrase. She was watching me. Her eyes were everywhere. A deep unease took hold of me. Rachel seemed oblivious to everything happening around her. She continued to play, calm and detached. One day, walking past her room, I saw her drawing on a sheet of paper. It was a portrait, a person lying in flames. Charred hands reaching upward, a face twisted in agony. "What is this, Rachel?" I asked, though I already knew I didn't want the answer. "It's my first dad," she said, not lifting her gaze from the drawing. At that moment, a cold chill ran through me. Could she remember something from the fire? Or perhaps she knew more than we wanted to believe. The following days became increasingly difficult. My wife assured me that I was just overworked and imagining things, but I could no longer ignore what was happening around us. Something had changed in our home. Sometimes it felt like Rachel knew I was afraid of her. Her gaze grew colder, and her smile became increasingly predatory. One evening, when I stepped outside to close the garage, I saw her teddy bear sitting on the porch. Beside it lay the knife from her toy collection. Written in blood on the asphalt were the words, "I've always loved you, Daddy." I froze, staring at the words on the ground. The air around me felt heavy, as if the house and everything around it were pressing down on me. Trying to calm myself, I convinced myself it was some sort of misunderstanding, maybe just a sick joke, albeit a very disturbing one. I carefully picked up the teddy bear and the knife. The blade was cold, as if it had just come out of a freezer. Waves of unease washed over me. When I walked back inside, Rachel was standing in the hallway. Her face was as serene as always. She held a new sheet of paper in her hands. "What is that, Rachel?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though my heart was pounding wildly. She handed me the drawing. This time, it was of me. The picture was disturbingly detailed for her age. My eyes were drawn as empty sockets, and my body was mangled, as if something had torn me apart from the inside. Next to me stood Rachel, holding her teddy bear. "It's just a fantasy," she explained with a smile. "I want us to be together forever." At that moment, I realized something was very wrong. My wife refused to see it, but I knew Rachel was bringing something dark into our home. Something that threatened not just me, but our entire family. That night, I resolved to have a serious talk with my wife. But when I entered the bedroom, I found her lying on the bed. She was in a deep, unnatural sleep. A thin red line ran across her neck, as if someone had traced it with a blade, but it hadn't drawn blood. On her chest lay the teddy bear. I held myself together as best I could. Carefully, I removed the teddy bear, placed it on the table, and went to Rachel's room. She was gone. The window was open, and an icy wind filled the room. On her bed lay a note written in a childish scrawl. "I know you don't love me, but I've always loved you." I searched for her throughout the house, the yard, even the neighbors' homes, but she had disappeared. The police launched an investigation but found only a few footprints in the dirt leading to the nearby forest, which abruptly ended there. Months passed. Life became hollow. My wife seemed to have forgotten about Rachel, as if she had never existed. But I couldn't. Every night, I woke up feeling someone's eyes on me. I saw shadows moving around the room and heard faint whispers, and every time, I found the teddy bear on the floor by my bed. One night was the final straw. I woke up to see Rachel standing by my bed. Her eyes glowed in the dark like those of a wild animal. "I told you we'd be together forever," she whispered. And before I could do anything, the room was engulfed in an oppressive blackness. Darkness engulfed everything around me. I couldn't see anything, only hear the faint sound of laughter in the air. It was Rachel's laugh, but it had changed. It was cold, otherworldly, as if she was merely a vessel for something much darker and more sinister. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. Suddenly, everything around me shifted. I found myself standing in the middle of a burned-out house, the same one where her first family had perished. Flames still flickered in the corners, and thick smoke hung in the air. In the darkness, I heard footsteps. She was coming toward me, clutching her ragged teddy bear. "Do you understand now, Daddy?" she whispered, tilting her head as if waiting for an answer. "What do you want from me?" I finally managed to yell. "I just wanted you to love me. If you had, everything would have been different. But now, you're a part of my world." I felt the ground beneath my feet crack, and I began to be pulled into a bottomless abyss. Burnt wooden debris fell around me, and Rachel just stood there, watching. Her eyes glowed with fire. "Goodbye, Daddy. You were the best of them all," she whispered, and her smile stretched through the darkness one last time. I woke up in a hospital bed. Doctors surrounded me, saying something I couldn't understand. The only thing running through my mind was one question. Was it a dream? Or was I really there? Later, I learned that I had been found unconscious in our house. The doctors suggested it was a heart attack brought on by severe stress. But I knew the truth. I could feel her presence. When I returned home, I saw that every trace of Rachel had vanished. It was as if she had never existed. There were no photographs, no toys, not even the records from the orphanage. No one, not even my wife, remembered her. She only looked confused when I kept asking about some girl. But I knew she was real. Every night as I lay in bed, I heard a faint whisper. And every time when I woke up, I found the teddy bear on the floor beside my bed. It was her goodbye. Or perhaps a warning.